Hi, and thanks for joining our CIO panel, Responding to Disruption. My name is David Starmer. I'm the Chief Transformation Officer at Everbridge. Today, we have senior technology leaders from 3 global organizations gathered to discuss their thinking around this disruption to our businesses, our teams, and our customers. Our speakers today are Paul Chapman, Senior Vice President and Global CIO Technology and Trust for Box, Michael Santiago, VP of Information Technology for Cytiva Corporation, formerly GE Healthcare Life Sciences, and Russ Soper, CIO of Finestra. If you have a question you'd like to be considered, please enter it into the Q&A widget on your screen. To start, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to give a brief introduction, and we'll start with Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul Chapman, Global CIO at Box. Box is a company that helps organizations simplify how they work through a secure collaboration, content collaboration platform. Trusted today by the world's leading organizations. We have close to 100,000 customers, and 70% of the Fortune 500 are customers of our platform.
Thanks, Paul. Russ?
Hi, thank you. Russ Soper, CIO of Finestra. Finestra is a large fintech providing financial services to most major banks and other firms, everything from hosting services for payments, lending, syndicated lending, all forms of banking, with a significant market share. Most of the banking sector uses one or more of our products. So about a firm of about 10,000 people focused on providing those services.
Great, thanks, Russ. And Mikey?
Hi, I'm Mikey Santiago. I'm the CIO and VP of IT at Cytiva, formerly part of GE Healthcare. Cytiva provides processes and tools and services to help with the development of therapeutics, including cell and gene therapies, vaccines, biologic drugs. I'm happy to say that we're part of the response to COVID-19, and it's nice to be part of the front line.
Terrific. Thanks, everybody. To start, I'd like to ask Mikey our first question, and I'm curious to hear how your organization first started to realize that this black swan event was going to have the magnitude that we now know it does.
Well, when you look back, you look back at, did you see signs of this earlier on? I think, obviously, we are a global organization. We knew what was happening in China late in 2019. It wasn't clear at that time how widespread it was going to be, if it was going to just be isolated within China. A lot of the practices that we're practicing globally now, we started within our own China organization, the shelter at home, people working remotely, providing support remotely. Our supply chain started to be impacted. So we started seeing it late 2019 as it impacted China.
Thanks. Paul, what about from Box.com customers?
Yeah, well, I think it was a situation that sort of felt like it was creeping up on us for a little bit of time there. Our risk organization was paying close attention to what was happening, but it wasn't really impacting us. Japan was actually our first site that actually was impacted. But I think we were sort of, as we were watching this sort of creep up on us and the potential to create disruption to how we work, we were testing, sort of doing the A/B testing, making sure that our NOC and our security incident response teams were able to work remote. And we were actually even looking at potentially taking one of our sites off-site for a day to test out how we would work from in a remote way. But the situation escalated really quickly, and conversations that were proactive very, very quickly switched to reactive as we all sort of moved or forced, I should say, to the world's largest work from home experiment. Although that feels so long ago now, it almost feels like a legacy conversation, the actual move to working from home. But it really sort of crept up on us, and then it accelerated. And of course, we've all been transitioning to working fully remote since then.
Russ, to Paul's point about preparing quickly, do you feel like your continuity of operations planning was able to pivot to adapt to this event?
We were. It's a great question. A lot of what's been said echoed very similarly. Hindsight always being 2020, you always learn from these things and find things you can do better and use it as a learning opportunity. But fortunately, we had a fairly extensive planning around business continuity and including pandemic response. So we did have some plans that we could enact fairly quickly. That said, there was certainly a fairly a very real need to be creative on the spot, because we clearly didn't anticipate the scope, the breadth, the size, the duration. So many perspectives to this, I think, were at least within my firm, and I suspect, this might be a recurring theme amongst people, is it was really tough to get a feel for the scope. From how would the globality of it, the duration of it, how would it affect things like supply chain, our ability to do things on a day-by-day basis, the transition from all the little nuanced things to a remote environment, something like a sales process, which is usually very face-to-face and relationship-driven. How can you facilitate those relationships in a remote manner? Being able to stand those things up very quickly. Frankly, we didn't plan for many aspects of those, many facets of that challenge. So we were able to pivot pretty quickly for some things, I guess, would be the answer. But there was a lot of creativity on the fly as well.
Right. Mikey, you and Russ both mentioned supply chain disruptions. I'm curious to hear a bit more about how you're monitoring, mitigating supply chain and just changes to vendor ecosystems generally.
Yeah, so we're involved in supply chain, both from our own products, but also from our vendors. As you know, Cytiva was just purchased by Danaher Corporation. We're quite proud to be part of the Danaher family. That happened just 6 weeks ago. So as part of that transition, we've had to transition over 40 sites globally from GE to Danaher. Obviously, that includes a lot of equipment, not only infrastructure equipment, but also end user devices, PCs that are localized, regionalized for a particular geography, mobile devices, routers, switches, et cetera. All of that is impacted by supply chain, by our vendors, and even our vendors' vendors. And we're not the only company that's out trying to buy 10,000 PCs. Everyone else is also trying to stock up, and vendor is hitting. The demand on them is quite overwhelming. So we've been very flexible and agile in how we transition these sites. Obviously, these sites are all over the globe, and they have their own shelter-in-place guidelines from their own governments, their own local governments. So we've had to adjust accordingly. When we can travel, can we travel even to do discovery work to identify what's needed to do the transition? So it's been quite overwhelming. And I think the trick here, not only for the site transition, but in general, is to be flexible. We're always pivoting every day. Priorities are changing every day. And that's also how we're responding to supply chain.
Thanks, Paul. That pivot that Mikey mentions, how have you pivoted to support collaboration from your now remote teams? And what are the operating norms like in this new way of doing business?
Yeah, well, certainly we're learning a lot, and I think there's a lot of things we're learning that are very positive that we will come out of the other side, and I think in a stronger position. At Box, we're very fortunate. We're a born in the cloud, grown up digital company, and from day one, guiding principles for us, our ethos has always been, our services don't discriminate between any single location. We're a distributed organization globally, but work is more of a state of mind, not a place. So culturally, we were tuned to sort of working in a sort of any place, anywhere, anytime. So the actual shift to working from a technology standpoint, working remote, was not such a big one. Although we did encounter some challenges. We needed to make sure we had a little bit more of a distributed VPN and a couple of things around the network edge, and some third-party service providers. But in the most part, we shifted to actually working remote fairly seamlessly. Of course, we saw all platforms that support communication exchange to go through a dramatic increase in usage, whether that's video, chat, collaboration, and so on. And it's been quite fascinating to see sort of the metrics of usage. And even at Box, where we can see the movement actually of content all over the world, in the millions and millions and millions of files. And we can actually see sort of the changing pattern of the work day, in fact. So a lot of very interesting data that's emerging. I will also say, though, that I think one of the things was important, and it still remains important, is that as leaders of organizations, we have to make sure our people are taken care of first. It wasn't just about making sure certain systems and services were up and running in order to be able to communicate and operate. It was also around leading with empathy and compassion is very crucial at this point in time. It's key to be socially connected with our teams, even though we were physically distant from each other, and making sure we had open and intentional communication with our organization. It was take care of yourselves first. Take care of your family, and work will take care of itself. So we definitely focused early on making sure that our organization was in a good place as well.
Thanks, Russ. How is Finastra leveraging technology and culture to support the remote workforce?
That's a great question. I really loved what I heard about employee well-being. I would echo that sentiment. We had 2 or 3 things we did with employee well-being at the forefront. That was priority number 1, and leveraging technology to try and make sure people were able to continue collaborating and being productive and feeling part of a global organization, particularly when they have other existential challenges going on, whether it be facilitating work plus homeschooling their children, and et cetera. So it was a bit of a unique challenge. I think I would echo what was said before to a degree. Is it was a bit serendipitous where we were in the midst of implementing some improved collaboration tools, and this just drove adoption through the roof very quickly. So from a silver lining perspective, it was probably the easiest rollout we've ever had to do, with some new video capability and chatting capability and all kinds of collaboration tools. People really gravitated towards that. Also, from a speeding up our strategy perspective, we are not like Box, where we were born in the cloud. So it is certainly a big part of our strategy. And for the last year or two, probably 2 years now, it is, we are digital everything and cloud everything. So this has sped that up from our products and our services. And we have some on-prem services that, even the way we support those, doing them in a more distributed and online fashion. So I would say heavy shift towards focused on improved collaboration tools, video, everything. Trying to see people's faces is important, whether it's the sales process, the internal working team process, but that was absolutely crucial. Video everything, digital everything, and cloud everything, I would say, would be the 3 pillars of what we really tried to do in how we work internally and how we deliver our services and maintain a global workforce.
Certainly a common theme that I've heard. Mikey, with the remote workforce that we've been discussing, the cybersecurity landscape begins to shift, and we've now opened up new vectors that bad actors didn't have to leverage before. So how do you start to think about cybersecurity in this new working paradigm?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the attack surface for a potential attacker has definitely increased. Tenfold, 100-fold. It now extends beyond the office, beyond the manufacturing plant, and into the home office. Security awareness and even security vigilance is of utmost importance now. Social engineering is on the rise and getting worse. Kind of cyber state attacks are on the rise as well. So, we have regular security awareness training that goes out to all associates. It's part of our crisis management plan. We also have on our intranet security awareness bulletins, so that people on a daily basis make sure that cybersecurity is part of their daily life. We have a NOC in place. We have a SOC in place. We do daily scanning of all of our endpoints. So we have incident response teams that are global and ready to respond whenever necessary. But as you know, most vulnerabilities are due to humans, right? And not necessarily intentional or malicious, but just someone clicking on the wrong thing at the wrong time. So security awareness is really important. It's something that we are really emphasizing.
Right, terrific, sounds good. Paul, we've talked a lot about the pivot, and you talked about flexibility earlier. I'm curious to hear what else is important to you now that wasn't prior. Certainly, I'm sure some things have been deprioritized, and there are probably some initiatives that are now either new on your plate or much more important than they were in January.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, to your point, that there's things that are necessarily new, as much as it's the pacing and the speed of which we're going to go after some of these things now. In fact, we're even doing that in our product and our platform as well, where we're accelerating some of the R&D efforts around our user experience for work from home, around some of the security aspects. We just mentioned that responding to a crisis does not mean security threats or compliant risks are any less pervasive than before. In fact, we ourselves have seen a significant uptick in COVID-19 malware attacks. Using bogus news articles, malicious emails, fake real-time COVID-19 update maps. All these types of things that bad actors are trying to figure out ways to go after vulnerabilities, and so we keep very close attention on the numbers and the metrics of what's going on underneath the covers, and to the earlier point, we've seen a significant increase there. So we're looking at accelerating and bringing forward some things in and around some security areas, some areas around our user experience and things like that. From an actual service system, corporate services standpoint, obviously now we're looking more at services that integrate with video, with chat services that are, whether that's sort of remote collaboration software for whiteboarding, developing code, things like that. Looking at things that integrate with services like video to do translation or transcripts of conversations, things that are going to integrate with these services now, which we're sort of living by, right? Anything that provides a service to support the communication fabric of your organization, like we said before, video, chat, content collaboration, and so on. So those are the areas we're going to go after. But I think that the key thing is that I've seen a lot of organizations, or I've spoken to a lot of organizations that are sort of somewhat nervous. They've not grown up in what you'd call a work from anywhere style. And some organizations are struggling with transition over others. You can't speed up the culture of an organization. You can roll out technology maybe faster. The pace is interesting. I've heard a lot of sort of 3 and 3 or 2 and 2, which is what would have been 3 years worth of investments in maybe in resiliency or your digital agenda. As we all know, the sort of the memes of, if you would have told me several months ago that COVID-19 was going to be the new champion of accelerating the digital agenda, I think you're crazy, but today that's the reality. So I think you have to be careful about speed over perfection. I think speed is one thing, but you have to make sure that you don't that we don't introduce any security risks. So it's sort of combining those two things together, I think, is extremely important at this time.
Thanks. Russ, Box is a digital native organization, has a leg up on many of the more legacy organizations that may be listening today. And some of those organizations have to make tough choices around staffing and budget. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how chief information officers approach cost containment and cost optimization when the business is responding to these sorts of interruptions.
I think it comes down to making sure you're spending your resources and your capital in the right areas, giving the shifting tide, so to speak. Constantly searching for ROI. So when I think of Finastra, we really do two or three things. We are a software shop. We build software. We host financial services for our clients as well, and we sell it. Those are the three things. So from a technology perspective, really looking at those three processes and understanding, given the changing world we're living in, how do we best enable those services in the most effective way with technology, in the most efficient way. So the sales example we mentioned before of, traditionally in a sales cycle, it would be very travel oriented. Salespeople would be on the road throughout the year. They'd fly to clients, they'd sit down, they'd build a relationship, they'd do a sales pitch in person. They may install something on the client's premise, or we may host it, but there's a lot of personal interaction. That's all changed. So how do we facilitate that from a technology perspective? And clearly there's funding and investment that goes with that. But we would offset it with the reduced travel and other things. So trying to redirect the funding into the most pragmatic way. Looking in the development, Finastra has a large population of software developers. Previously a mix of on-site in centers of excellence around the world and maybe some remote, but predominantly on-site. Now 98, 99% off-site and remote, working from home. So some areas were fairly smooth transitions where we already had remote connectivity, people were technically savvy, so they could make that transition. But when you get into the day-to-day working, as they're doing large-scale file transfers or other things that they may do throughout their course of their day, those things take orders of magnitude more time if it's going back and forth to their house, particularly in certain countries around the world. So how do we facilitate that? How do we facilitate BYOD? How do we improve our perimeter security now that our entire workforce is working remotely? So it's really been, I should say, continues to be an effort of understanding what are the business processes, where we spend our money today. And that's probably I think the foundation is understanding how money's spent. To your other point, the first thing around whether you want to call it cost containment or demand management, different terms, I think, for different processes. But I think the first step is really having absolute clarity on where you're spending your money and are you getting value for that spend. And then you can align that against the shifting environment you're working in. And we've had a big shift in the last 60, 90 days, and understanding where you need to redirect accordingly.
Yeah, it comes back to the core tenets of alignment with the business imperatives, I would say. Mikey, what's the grounding in your relationship with your stakeholders across the business about how you plug into strategy creation so that you are in a good position today to respond to the COVID-19 events? Building off the foundation, the relationships that already existed.
Yeah, I think those relationships are of utmost importance. I think you mentioned the customer relationship and how that changes now in this situation. It's true also with our business relationships, right? So our business relationships, instead of side by side, are virtually side by side. That's how we are tied into business strategy, and in fact, in many ways, help define and drive business strategy. As an IT organization, as an IT leader, I consider us as a business function, and I consider myself as a business leader. We represent the voice of technology for the business. We also have insights into the voice of the business, where the business is going. So we are uniquely situated to provide insights that intersect between the voice of technology and the voice of business, so we can inject technology where it makes sense. We can move technology forward where it makes sense. We can provide technology options as we define how we want to transform our business, how we want to interact with our customer better, how we want to change the customer experience. So I actually have a network of BRMs, business relationship managers, that are tied with all of the functional leaders within the corporation. And we do that at every level. So it's quite a mesh network, so that any strategic elements get bubbled up and cascaded down. So from a strategic point of view, we're tightly coupled with the business. I'm part of the definition of corporate strategy that we do on an annual basis. But beyond that, I think, we've talked a lot about operational things. I think that same network also is quite useful in operational excellence and operational optimization. And that's what we kind of have to do today when you talk about cost optimization.
Paul, what about your perspective on that same question? Staying plugged into the business and driving it where necessary.
Yeah, but I think fortunately, as far as portfolio of investments and projects or scale of the business investments and so on, we're concerned. We were fortunate. We recently just finished our annual planning. Our annual our year end is actually end of January, so we started our new fiscal year at the beginning of February. So just prior to sort of the shift here, and so our portfolio for the year was fairly locked down at that point. We knew our staffing models, our investments, the strategic areas we were going after, and that really hasn't been blown off course because of this. Fortunately, our business model hasn't been blown off course, and therefore, we're not unfortunately, like some organizations that I've been talking to that are in, mass sort of layoffs or cost cutting. So for us, it's not an increase necessarily, but it is sort of somewhat what would be business as usual, but in a remote way. And I was a little nervous early on about some of the sort of interactions that are required to execute on projects, especially when you have teams that are already sort of separated, and there's a lot of stressors going on in people's personal lives as well right now. But fortunately, the team has been really resilient in their ability to continue to execute and deliver. In fact, we just delivered 2 projects this last month here. So I think from that perspective, that's been good. I will say this, though. I think that, and maybe we'll touch on this in a little bit more deeply in a moment, and that is certainly, like someone was mentioning a moment ago about everything on video. There definitely is what we've seen, an increase in participation and engagement when everybody's on video. More so than when you have a certain subset on video and subset in say a conference room. We've definitely seen a higher engagement and participation rate, and I think we're seeing that in whether that's a tech conference or an all hands meeting. People want to be connected as much as possible, although we have to be careful of sort of the burnout and sort of where the day begins and where the day ends, and a lot of those things which we can touch on. But generally, in the most part, the set of strategic initiatives that we were investing in for this coming fiscal year have not been blown off course. So we're fortunate in that regard.
Russ, the mobile workforce is constantly connected with Slack and Teams and email and mobile devices, and 10 feet on the other side of the store is the rest of life right now. So I'm curious to understand how your organization is thinking, to Paul's point, about helping employees draw a brighter line. You've given them all these great tools, but there's a point in time where, from an engagement perspective, you want them to step back and seek balance. How do you as a technologist help with that balance?
It's a very interesting subject, and you saw me smiling probably when this conversation was going on. I think when we started on this path and making this large shift to basically moving over 10,000 employees to work from home within a week, it was a pretty Herculean challenge, and there were some conversations around, okay, let's make sure people can work, and obviously employee well-being is number one. But how do we make sure that people are actually being productive, and how do we measure efficiency, and how do we make sure that people are actually really working. And what we found very quickly was the exact opposite was a concern. It was not a concern that do we think people are actually working. It was, how do we stop them from working 16, 18-hour days? Because there's no natural cutoff point. There's no train to catch, no bus to catch to go home. You kind of go upstairs, downstairs, have dinner with your family, and then keep working. And it just, so back to the number one objective that the firm's been, and our CEO has been very, he's been a force of nature around this, around employee well-being, being number one, is leveraging tooling with some of our partners. We're a big Microsoft partner, and leveraging some tools that they've provided within some of their cloud services that we've been leveraging that actually show some fairly granular analytics around people's time, where they're spending it, how they're spending it, from a productivity perspective, so we can really help them strike that balance, and it automatically schedules focus time, so you're not getting transacted constantly by 20 different pings and unable to get any real strategic thought process time, and it tracks how many meetings or emails you're doing out of hours, so you can really, and I found that, I have to say, admittedly, I was it was not my top focus to really worry about those things and getting that kind of data. But once I saw it, it was tremendously beneficial in helping me to sit down with my team and really balance things out better, understand what people are really doing, at a personal level, from, how are they able to deal with this well, and is this affecting their life in a certain way? And if they're taking calls, particularly in a global organization, if they're taking calls at 11 p.m. 4 nights a week, that's something we really need to try to address. We're obviously impacting on their personal life there a little bit. So I think the leveraging back to some of the key themes we talked about earlier in the conversation, cloud everything, digital everything, and tooling and collaboration really has helped us not only enable people to work from home, but also to do it in a way that is sustainable. Because this is, the world is now focusing, it's shifted in the last week or so, where we're now focusing on reopening for business. But it's reopening probably in a different way for at least a little while. It's not going to go back to what it was in January right off the bat, maybe not for a while. So some of these working patterns and new operating models are here to stay for at least the short term. So I think it's fairly paramount that we make sure that people are doing this in a sustainable way and we don't suffer burnout.
Yeah, that's terrific. The next normal, Mikey, is not January. To Russ's good point, it's something different. How are you all thinking about what return to an eventual more traditional working model looks like, or are you going back to it?
Well, I'll start. I don't think we actually need to. I think there are some things that we've learned that are actually better. I do agree, though, on the last topic there, though, that no one is working 9 till 5 anymore. But there is more of a flexible schedule that people are able to operate under now. We're starting to see, we've introduced things like, I'm trying to remember the name of the app, Headspace. It's one of those mindfulness apps. It provides guided meditation, tips for practicing sleep exercise and general wellness and so on. We've created a wellness portal with fitness challenges. We've seen people really transition now into a mode where, we're doing online, cooking classes, yoga, Peloton meetings, things like that. So people are settling into sort of the new norm. I would say though that the thing that I think some people have blind spots to is you have to be careful that we do still have people that live alone, maybe in single studios or single bedroom apartments and relatively isolated. And we want to make sure that we're extra reach outs and making sure that they're very keen to come back to the office. But certainly coming back to the office, if that's what we want to call it now, sort of what does the new normal look like? Absolutely, for sure, this is going to be, the timing of this is interesting because I think, without effective therapy or vaccine for the next, 6, 12, 18 plus months, we could see rolling shutdowns happening on a frequent basis. And so there's definitely not a rush, and this is definitely going to be transitioning back is going to be very gradual. And, we have this patchwork of government advisory, stay-at-home orders at the county level, the government level, whatever it might be. And so there's going to be, we don't know what all the restrictions are going to be and what the new sort of office environment sort of mandates look like. So we think that we're going to, I don't think that physical office presence is going to be as imperative going forward as it was previously. Now we've made this transition. I think that employees are going to be more discerning in what they ask for around their health and safety in the office space. And I think there's going to be a whole new set of, thresholds, policies. How do you think about visitors, customers? So we're working through that right now. And, we think, even that after self-quarantine is lifted, there's going to be a reluctance to rush back in. And we're going to see, like I say, a more discerning workforce that's going to expect, credible assurances that they're working in a safe environment. And I think the tricky part is that this is unprecedented, right? We haven't gone through this before. I like to say it's good to boldly go where others have gone before, because there's data we can learn from, but we're all learning from this together. And so our stance has actually been to sort of wait and see a little bit. We're seeing companies push out their re-entry dates to 2021, later this year. And even companies saying, hey, look, we think we're going to be in a permanent work remote environment going forward. Now, of course, that's tricky for or people that need to go to labs and manufacturing facilities. I mean, that's different, right? But we're a little bit in a wait and see, because we don't actually know how this is going to land just yet.
Right, Mikey, you certainly have some of those more non-traditional environments, manufacturing, laboratories. How are you approaching return to work and collaboration in those spaces where physical presence is frankly required?
Yeah, I think how you define the workplace means different things to different people, right? So there's certainly the workplace where we have labs and manufacturing. We have to do that in a way that the employees can be safe. We have to have proper PPE. We have to have proper precautions. We have to make sure, as was mentioned before, that visitors and vendors can also be properly maintained in a safe way. But I think the work environment is changing, has changed, and will have changed forever. The work environment is more than a place where we work. We talked a little bit about work-life balance earlier, and how it's easy just to go into your home office after you've had dinner with the family. You just go right back to work. But I think we also have to remember that the work environment is also a community, right? It's more than a place where we work, but it's a place where we also socialize. Our colleagues have become our friends and family as well. And that's a place where we get support. That's a place where we share our lives. And now that part is missing, right? It's done in a virtual manner, and it's important that we replace that. I think you mentioned earlier that some people live alone, and so the work environment for them was part of their family. It was how they socialized. So we've talked a lot about care and feeding of the employee, or making sure that the well-being is and their mental state is not impacted by this. And those are some things that we're trying to replace. We have virtual coffee breaks. We make sure that we have a reach out. I touch out to people throughout the organization every day, just to say hi, just as I would if I were at a facility and I would just stop by someone's office. I do the same thing virtually. I think that's important to maintain those kinds of connections, those human connections, because that's really part of what the work environment is and will be moving forward.
Thanks. I think we have time for one last question, and the question we'll take is to Russ, and it's, how are you thinking about planning for what comes next? Paul referenced rolling shutdowns, but as a technologist, how do you think about continuing to support the business as flexibility continues to be required?
Well, it's back to, I think, what we said before. It's around understanding what the potentials are in this shifting dynamic. One of the underlying themes, I think, we've heard throughout the different topics we've discussed is every business is a business of relationships, whether it's with your staff, with your clients, with your partner organizations. So I would say certainly this is fast tracking some of the strategies that a firm like ours, the journey we were already on. We're 2 years into a 3-year strategy of digital everything, cloud everything, as I said, and now mobility is a key, probably third pillar in that strategy. It was already there, but it was more workplace of the future. I would argue, just the lens that we're looking at from a workplace of the future perspective has shifted a bit in the last few months. This event has made us rethink some aspects of it, particularly workplace of the future. But it's also reinforced a lot of what we were already focused on and saying, how can we do this quicker? Whether it be digital tools and collaboration and video, cloud adoption of our products, it's reinforced, and we're hearing it from our clients, particularly as they are suffering and struggling with some of the same challenges that everybody else is, where they may not be able to get to their own facility for governmental restrictions or travel restrictions. So the ability to do things from everywhere, from a cloud-based environment, is crucial to them. So right. It has sped up a lot of our existing strategies or reinforced them, maybe shifted a few. But looking at where we're investing money and making sure it's aligned to those future state strategies around mobility, cloud everything, digital everything is really the key.
Yeah, certainly it sounds like we've all put focus on digitization, transformation, and velocity to get things moved ahead. Well, I'd like to thank each of you for giving your time and your collective insights today as technology leaders. I'd like to thank our audience that's in attendance. For more information about Everbridge, you can refer to the resource widget on the lower right portion of your screen. And that concludes our discussion. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.